To counter the terrorism threat after 9/11, the government made a rush to remake our airport security by slapping together an inefficient bureaucratic agency, the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, to survey Americans as they board airplanes. 12 years later, the waste of billions of dollars of taxpayer money and the terrible security of the program has resolved the affirmative team that the United States federal government should reform its counterterrorism policies for the domestic surveillance of U.S. citizens. First, we will define a few key terms and acronyms under Observation 1, Definitions. From the American Heritage Dictionary, terrorism, the use of violence or threat of violence. Counterterrorism, intended to prevent or counteract terrorism. Policy, a plan or course of action. 4, as regards concerning. Surveillance, close observation of a person or group. Next, let's look at the objects of our plan and Observation 2, goals and criteria. Our goals come from the Department of Homeland Security Strategic Plan 2012 to 2016. Goal 1, strengthen aviation security. Goal 2, ensure maximum efficiency. In brief, our goals are to increase security and maximize efficiency. Now the criteria. You will know that the affirmative team has won when we either show that our plan will better meet the goal of status quo security or efficiency. Now let us look at what the affirmative team is doing under Observation 3, the plan. Mandate 1, privatize airport security by amending the Aviation and Transportation Security Act so that the counterterrorism surveillance of citizens and airport security at commercial service airports will not be done by the Transportation Security Administration, but will be delegated to airports and open to contracting by private security firms. Mandate 2, to ensure effective security under the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, airports will be required to achieve standards established by the Aviation Security Service Association International, or ASSAI Quality Charter, an international standard used by much of the world to ensure quality airport security. According to a House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure report in 2011, participation in the ASSAI Quality Charter demonstrates a commitment to meet standards that exceed even what the government requires. Our plan will be implemented over a period of 3 years. Agency, Congress, the President, Department of Homeland Security, and the Federal Aviation Administration. Enforcement, normal means. Funding, funding. Eliminating the TSA will save a little more than $7.5 billion. According to the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, approximately 58%, or $4 billion, of that will be needed by airports to purchase private security. The total taxpayer savings of our plan will then amount to $3 billion, according to the Cato Institute. This will take place through normal means. The affirmative team reserves the right to expand and clarify on this plan as necessary. So now let us look at Observation 4, the advantages. Advantage 1, stronger airport security. The unique, the part of the comparative advantage case structure where inherency is found. A unique shows what aspect of the current system is halting progress. In this case, it is the status quo. From the Cato Institute, November 2013, Privatizing the TSA by Chris Edwards, states, a House report described the TSA as an enormous, inflexible, and distracted bureaucracy that has lost its focus on transportation security. The article continues on to say that when the TSA makes mistakes, it imposes them on the entire aviation system. The SPOT program, screening passengers by observation techniques, is an example. TSA installed SPOT without first studying in detail whether or not it worked. The impact of this is that the status quo has huge security gaps. From Privatize the TSA, Make Americans Safer by Letting Airports Handle Security, Doug Bando of the Cato Institute, January 2014, states there were 25,000 security breaches at U.S. airports during TSA's first decade in operation, despite the agency's huge spending and all of the inconveniences imposed on passengers. In tests, the agency failed to catch as much as 3/4 of fake explosives. Solvency, which is the benefit of the affirmative team's plan, is a privatized screening system has better security. From privatizing the TSA, previously cited, Europe's airports moved to private contracting during the 1980s and 1990s after numerous hijackings and terrorist threats, and has worked very well. From the Associated Press report, Private Airport Screeners Better, April 2005, citing the chairman of the House Aviation Subcommittee, stated the Government Accountability Office found statistically significant evidence that passenger screeners who worked at private airports perform better than their federal counterparts. Advantage 2, more efficient security. The unique is that the TSA is inefficient. From privatizing the TSA, previously cited, former RAND Corporation James Thompson noted in 2007 that the Department of Homeland Security implements most of its programs with little or no evaluation of their performance. There are two impacts. The first impact is that there is an enormous waste of money. From the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, TSA ignores most cost-effective screening model, June 2011, states the TSA has hired 137,000 staff since the agency's creation and spent more than $2 billion on recruiting and training costs due to high attrition. Impact 2, there's a huge waste of time in the status quo. From Airport Security, Time for a New Model, January 2006, by Robert W. Poole of the Transportation Studies at the Reason Foundation, states that using TSA data from 2004 to 2005, USA Today found at the 15 busiest airports, although average waits were seldom more than 5 minutes, the maximum wait could be as long as 133 minutes. This kind of extreme variability forces passengers to arrive at the airport far earlier than is usually necessary, wasting a huge amount of people's time. Solvency. A privatization increases efficiency. There are two impacts. Impact 1, money is more efficiently spent. From policy analysis by the Cato Institute, David Rickers, September 2011, he states the clearest way to reduce spending on airport screening is to reprivatize airport security. That would save $3 billion. Impact 2, Americans' valuable time is saved. From delayed U.S. aviation infrastructure policy at crossroads, the Brookings Institute by Stephen Morrison and Clifford Winston, May 2008, states the key to reducing delays efficiently is to rid the system of its major inefficiencies. We believe that this can only be accomplished by privatizing the nation's aviation infrastructure. The Reason Foundation article continues on to say that regular lane time under the new privatization model would be cut from 19.5 minutes to 12.1 minutes. Ending the inefficient bureaucracy of the TSA by privatizing airport security would make our airports more secure and more efficient. Thank you, and I'm open for cross-examination and clarification.
How many mandates did you have?
We have 2 mandates.
Can the affirmative bring up evidence saying that private security has improved since 2000?
We can bring up more evidence in the next speech.
What is the SPP?
SPP, I believe, is it was a limited form of privatization that does exist in the status quo.
How many airports has SPP extended to?
I believe there are at this particular time 16 airports under this program.
Did the evidence underfunding mention TSA, excuse me, I have to ask a different question. Did you have competitive bidding in your mandates?
Yes, under Mandate 1, we are privatizing airport security, This security will be delegated to airports and open to contracting by private security firms.
Does this mean that it will go to the lowest bidder?
In this particular system, what will happen is most companies, or all companies, want maximum quality with at the lowest price, so that's what they'll be looking for.
When was the TSA created?
I believe it was created after 9/11.
What did airports have for security before the TSA was created?
They had privatization, a form of privatization.
Did 9/11 occur under a privatized system?
It did, but that does not...
Thank you. How exactly is the current system not efficient?
The current system is not efficient. One moment. Bye. Let's see. The high attrition costs, which are basically TSA employee misbehavior and let's see.
Sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
Will the TSA be in an oversight role?
No, the TSA does not have an oversight role in our case.
What exactly does the TSA do then? Is it completely abolished?
It is not, although we are not, it will no longer be part of airport security. They have other responsibilities apart from airport security, and we are not touching
But it will not have any
those.
oversight role in the airports?
No, the TSA will not have any oversight.
Then what standard will the what will make sure that the privatized airports are meeting a certain standard?
The Federal Aviation Administration will be using these ASSA quality charter, the quality charter we highlight in our mandate 2.
So the FAA in general will be making sure that the privatized airports are efficient.
I believe that well, it is the FAA is our enforcement agency.
Thank
in
you.
this
No
case.
further questions.
Private screening at airports could undermine not just public confidence in the aviation security system, but in aviation security itself. We have been there and experienced the consequences of private screening. The American public must feel secure when it travels, said Joe Lieberman, former senator from Connecticut. This is exactly the truth. The private screeners were used before 9/11, and look where that got us. After 9/11, we realized that something needed to change, which is why the Transportation Security Administration was enacted. This affirmative team is trying to look at this in terms of mostly efficiency and effectiveness. However, what they would really be doing is decreasing national security while not really making a significant change into any of the problems they claim are in the status quo. First, we want to look at the issue under the goal. The goals were first of strengthening aviation security, and second, to ensure maximum efficiency. Now, whether or not they still do this, whether or not these are actually good goals, we agree with that. However, they will not be meeting these very satisfactorily. Next, under the mandates, this first mandate is that they will be privatizing airport security. Now, what this does is it causes competitive bidding in the security airport security market, and these private firms are going to be looking into working for airports to actually get the security. What this causes is competitive bidding, where the lowest bidder, wherever the airport chooses, is most likely going to get the job. The main point here is that you get what you pay for, and if private screeners are more efficient and don't cost as much, then obviously there's a very legitimate concern that they won't be nearly as effective. We'll look at this more under the disadvantages as we go on. Now, one thing I'd like to point out under the funding. Now, the affirmative team said that they are actually, I do not want to address that because that is not an argument. Under the advantages, before we get too far into the advantages, we want to make sure we point out what the negative team believes is the most important here. Daniel Prito from February 2009, the Council on Foreign Relations, says that the United States has not suffered another attack on U.S. soil, which speaks to the efficacy of various U.S. counterterrorism efforts. Obviously, we haven't had a significant terrorist attack, especially in this form of aviation, since 9/11, so the system is working well. Also, as we'll see later on, there are ways that the government is working to balance these two issues of government security and private security, as they're doing incrementally as they see a need to. And first, we need to look at the, also P.J. Crowley on February 2008 in his article, Safe at Home, A National Security Strategy to Protect the American Homeland, the Real Central Front, the Center for American Progress, pretty much sums up what the negative team is believing here. The paramount responsibility for Homeland Security belongs to the federal government. It simply cannot be outsourced to state and local governments or the private sector. Now, the first advantage was that of stronger airport security. However, they believe this was mostly true because private security is much more effective. However, as we'll see later on in the disadvantage, this is simply not the case. But there is an inherency argument to this advantage. The fact is that the TSA and other aviation security systems in the government are working towards mixing and balancing the two issues of government security and private security in a way that they seem fit. James J. Carafano of the Heritage Foundation, September 11, 2012, says, moving towards a mixed, non-union federal workforce and greater reliance on private sector screening companies would likely provide the United States in the near term with a balanced and responsive workforce at a responsible cost. In recent months, additional airports have applied and given tentative approval to join the SPP. Now, what exactly is this SPP? It's the Screening Partnership Program, which the Transportation Security Administration on January 15, 2014 explains to us what that is. They say that currently 11 additional airports have been awarded a contract and are participating in the program for a total of 14. Airport directors may submit their application to participate in the screening partnership program to TSA at any time. Private contract companies must adhere to TSA's security standards, and contract screeners must meet the requirements applicable to federally employed screeners. Basically what happens here is if an airport applies and gets approval, then they can use their own private screening. This option is available. Now, of course, there aren't very many airports doing this currently, which is because the TSA is a fairly new agency. It was only created after 9/11, and the SPP program is even newer. It was implemented, I believe, around 2007. So they're still working out the bugs for this program. The affirmative team may come up and say that this SPP program is underused and has been blocked by the Transportation Security Administration. However, Congress has been involved in making sure that this program is working very effectively. Robert Poole of the Reason Foundation on March 7, 2012 said, "Finally, more than a year after a TSA administrator abruptly terminated any additional airports joining the SPP and rejected all pending applications, Congress has put some muscle where its mouth has been. In the FAA reauthorization bill signed by the President, Congress underscored the importance of SPP being available to all airports. To reinforce that point with the TSA, it now requires that agency to provide details on any opt-out application that it denies, explaining the reasons for such denial to the airport in question and to the relevant congressional committees." In the past, TSA has been very defensive about the SPP program. Obviously, it might mean that they get outsourced out of their job. However, Congress and other agencies have taken a role into this so that privatization and that mix between government and private sector screening can occur well. This means that the TSA has, as of April 1st, 2013, begun approving airports for this program again. So really, there isn't very much inherent need to pass this plan because the current system is already working towards that balance of government and private screening. Now, second under this point was the fact of, actually we'll move down to the second advantage, which was more efficient security. Now, the unique point under here was that government security is simply inefficient. However, the current system is working to improve their efficiency so that they aren't wasting time and money to do this. P.J. Crowley and Lindsay Ross of the Center for American Progress, April 2nd, 2009, tells us about the pre-check program, which is a program where the TSA can let people apply to get screened or waived past the screening process and not have to go through lengthy lines, especially if they've proven with background checks that they aren't a suspected terrorist. That is a way that they're improving security. Robert Poole of the Reason Foundation, April 1st, 2013, says, "Launched in fall 2011, the program is named PreCheck and proved to be highly attractive to frequent flyers. TSA reviews the travel history of premium frequent flyers, and those accepted use a special checkpoint lane and expedited screening. During 2012, TSA has continued to expand PreCheck, reaching its initial goal of having it in place for at least some airlines in 35 airports by the end of 2012. The key thing to understand here is that we don't want to make a poor decision where we're valuing efficiency over the ultimate goal of security, where we have to protect the American homeland from any aviation attack that could be disastrous, just like 9/11. So this is one of the smart ways that the TSA has been working to balance these two things so that it can work on having itself efficient while not compromising any of the security that it already has. Next, we'll on to, which basically means here that they won't have that their impact of money already better spent and time delays is actually already happening in the current system. And real quick, I'd like to highlight a couple disadvantages that my partner will elaborate on in her next speech, which is first that we'll have poor security from private contractors, and second that there will be not very much cooperation between airports and these new private contractors, and finally that this transition could actually create a very high job loss for TSA screeners. Thank you, and I now stand open for cross-examination and clarification. Thanks.
What was your disadvantage two?
Disadvantage two is that there wouldn't be very much cooperation between airports and new private security.
Okay, and disadvantage three was that of
job
TSA
loss
job
between
loss.
For Transportation Security Administration.
Okay, now under our mandate, you stated that that this privatized system, these companies would want to go to the lowest bidder and therefore get the lowest quality.
Yes, that is definitely a concern.
Well, did you read any evidence under that?
I did not.
Okay. And under advantage one, was your, I noticed you read evidence stating that there have been no attacks since 9/11 due to various security measures. Now,
Yes.
aren't those other security measures more than just the TSA?
Of course,
Did
all of this goes into protecting the American homeland, but the TSA is definitely part of that.
Did your evidence specifically mention that the TSA has been since that point?
Well, I think the
an
bottom
active
line
role?
here is that under private contractors, 9/11 happened, and
Can you
since
answer
the TSA,
my question? Did your evidence specifically mention that the TSA has a role in counterterrorism?
It did not. I believe we can bring that up
Like
later
it's
on.
effective. Okay. Thank you. And your inherency point was basically that of the SPP
Yes.
airport program, correct? Okay. And as of 2011, 35 airports, oh wait, excuse me, no, that's something else. Now, how exactly is Congress working to make SPP available to?
Well, they put it into the FAA reauthorization bill, and they've used some of their authority to make sure the TSA is working on doing this. I believe I read some evidence under that point.
Okay. And for Advantage 2, you stated that the unique, under the unique, you have the TSA pre-check argument, is that correct?
Yes.
And as of, can you give more recent, do you have any more recent evidence stating what the number of airports that have pre-check is up to this point, 2014?
I believe the latest number I have is at the end of 2012, there were 35 airports.
Oh, okay, 35 airports, okay.
If you have more
Now-
recent numbers, that
Well,
would be
and,
great.
and why would, what is the likelihood that that if there's only 35 airports, why aren't they being adapted at all airports?
Well, first of all, this is a very new program, especially by government standards. It was, I believe, only released in 2010, 2011, and their initial goal was 2012. So it's still a work in progress, but it is definitely being worked towards.
Okay, and your argument under the goals was basically that you agree, but we are not meeting it. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Okay, and you mentioned that under the SPP program, am I correct in saying that the TSA still has a regulatory position over those airports?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Thank you. That is all.
Thank you.
When we were scared about 9/11, we spent millions of dollars on body armor for dogs in Ohio, and we federalized airport security. All that overreaction comes from fear and government, a bad combination. That is from journalist John Stossel. And today the affirmative team is going to try to repair the overreaction that came after 9/11 with the creation of the TSA, which actually has worsened our airport security while wasting us billions of dollars and lots of time too. First, under the goals. The negative team accepted our goals, so the weighing mechanism for the round will be whether we can improve the status quo by, number one, strengthening airport security, or number two, improving its efficiency. Our criteria was whether we could better meet one of those goals without worsening the other, and thus improving the status quo. Next, under the plan, I'd like to clarify some things under our plan. Our first mandate is that the TSA is not going to be in charge of airport security at all, nor is it going to be regulating it. Instead, airports will be in charge of contracting their own private security, and they will contract an expert private security firm to do it for a certain amount of time. It's definitely not going to the lowest bidder. Airports can decide which contract they're going to require under both price and quality. So it's not just going to the lowest bidder, to clarify that. I want to give you 3 reasons right now why private security is better than the TSA run. Number one is competition. From privatizing the Transport Security Administration, said the words of the Cato Institute, November 2013. Aviation security firms have developed a great deal of expertise over the decades. Unlike government bureaucracies, they improve their performance over time, particularly in a competitive contracting environment. Bad private screeners just don't exist because they've all gone out of business. Competition is one thing that makes private inherently better than a monopoly like the TSA. Next reason is decentralized control. From the same article, TSA has demonstrated many of the failings typical of large monopoly federal bureaucracies. It imposes one-size-fits-all solutions on the whole country. Local control over the workforce decisions makes more sense than the current centralized system. What works at some small airports doesn't always work at huge airports. So having local control over the airport is going to make for better security than a one-size-fits-all solution. Finally, the third point is that the private sector actually tests and analyzes their programs before they implement them. From the previously cited article, Rand Corporation President James Thompson noted in 2007 that the Department of Homeland Security implements most of its programs with little or no evaluation of their performance. Basically, it makes America one big guinea pig for testing its programs, which is not a good idea. Rather, the private security firms are international and have tested their techniques over lots of airports until they narrow it down to only have the best ones. Our mandate, too, was to ensure quality security by making sure that private security firms adhere to basic quality standards established by the ASSAI Quality Charter. Here's a piece of evidence that explains that. From the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the TSA ignores more cost-effective screening model, 2011. In order to maintain a common standard of safety, international security companies form the Aviation Security Service Association International, or the ASSAI Quality Charter, that guarantees a high level of performance and service. Participation in the charter demonstrates a commitment to meet standards that exceed even what the government requires. So that's our second mandate there. Our funding is that we're going to be saving $7.5 billion by eliminating the TSA. $4 billion, or about 58% of that, according to the House Committee, is going to go back to airports to pay for private security, making a net of $3 billion in taxpayer savings. With that being said, I'll jump right into the advantages. First, I want to address well, before we get into that, I will talk about the 9/11 just to relieve that concern in your minds. We're not actually going back to the system before 9/11. According to Privatizing the Transportation Security Administration, as previously cited, prior to 9/11, we had private screening, but it was a poorly structured system. The key problem was that the FAA delegated screening to the airlines and not the airports, which are in a better position to balance the demands of security, cost, and customer service. Before it was done by the airlines, we're doing it by airports. So that's a major difference. Also, 9/11, all they brought on the plane was, I believe, box cutters, so that couldn't really have been stopped by security anyway, which are looking primarily for bombs. So now the advantages. Advantage one is more security. They had an inherency argument about the SPP program. One thing I'd like to note about the SPP, first of all, the TSA hates the SPP program because it's a threat to their bureaucracy, and they are rejecting lots of applications. In 2011, according to the Cato Institute, they rejected applications from 6 airports to join the SPP. Also, the SPP is not true privatization. From Airport Security Time for a New Model, 2006, the Robert W. Poole of the Reason Foundation found that the TSA in the SPP program, the TSA provided the screening contractors with little opportunity to demonstrate innovations, achieve efficiencies, and implement initiatives that go beyond the minimum requirements of the Aviation Transportation Security Act. But in those limited cases where the TSA did provide some operational flexibility, the Government Accountability Office found that these practices have enabled private screening companies to achieve efficiencies that are not currently available at airports with federal screeners. Well, let's look at more of those efficiencies under advantages. First, our advantage is more airport security. First, let's establish that the TSA is doing a bad job. Not only do they let 75% of bombs through, as my partner read, they have also missed bombs in several recent terrorist cases. According to the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, as previously cited, the TSA has failed to properly deploy terrorist plots in several recent examples. The shoe bomber, the liquid bomb ploy, the underwear bomber, the cargo package plot, and the Times Square bomber. All these bombs got right through TSA security and were thwarted mainly for luck, and for instance, the shoe bomber, he couldn't get his bomb off. So the TSA didn't really do its job. But private security workers are better. My partner read evidence about how Europe switched to private security, and that worked much better. But we also have examples in the United States of the SPP program, how private screeners do better in that. According to the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, as previously cited, in 2007, the USA Today uncovered TSA test results that 75% of fake bombs got through LAX Airport, which has TSA screeners, while only 20% got through at San Francisco International Airport, which has private screeners. Which airport would you rather travel on? One where 75% of the bombs get through, or a private airport where only 20% of the bombs get through? As Capital One puts it, who doesn't want 55% less bombs? Okay, So that's our first advantage there. Next advantage, really quick, is increased efficiency. The House Committee found that private screeners are 65% more efficient than private screeners. There's two impacts of that. Number one is money. The Cato Institute found we're saving $3 billion. And number two is a lot of time being saved. Real quick, the pre-check, a couple quick points here. First, it's only been implemented at 35 airports out of the 400 we have now. Number two, it has some serious cost disadvantages. Thank you, and I'll stand up for cross-examination and clarification.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, under the evidence that you read about the SPP and that the TSA hates it, rejects applications, what was the date for that article?
That was from Privatizing the Transportation Administration, November 19th, 2013, which was very recent.
Okay, and now, when was the SPP created? When was this program implemented?
It was begun actually right at the same time the TSA took over. They let 5 airports do private screening, so that would be 2001.
Okay. And is it true that for a long time the TSA was opposed to this, correct?
They're still opposed to it, actually, as of November 2013.
Could other agencies maybe put more control on the TSA so that they're more open to this program?
I guess.
Okay, that would be a possibility?
That would be a possibility.
All right, and is the, well, actually, let's go down to the pre-check issue. What are the kind of cost disadvantages to this pre-check?
It costs $85 to get in it.
Compared to what?
Under a private system, you get faster going through security without having to pay a lot of money.
And the private screening, though, is faster, but it doesn't have background checks and types of other safeguards?
Now, everyone gets through faster, so it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Now, when was the pre-check program implemented?
I believe you said it was 2010.
All right. Well, actually, let's go on from that. When you move the TSA from, when you move screening from TSA to private, what will happen to all of the TSA screeners?
They will have to find a new job.
So they'll just lose their jobs right away?
Yes, but we're also going to be hiring a lot of new people with private security firms. They're going to be creating a lot of jobs too.
Could this also create a type of bubble in the private screener market where it becomes cost efficient for a while, but then the price increases?
Could you rephrase the question? I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Will you be creating a surplus in the amounts of people needed for private screening?
We're going to need probably some workers to work at private screening.
Right, and this would maybe create an influx in the amount of people hired by private screening?
Yes, but
would it also create an influx in the amounts of private screening companies who exist and who create economic benefits, all of that?
Actually, there are lots of private security firms who are capable of taking over an airport right now. We have evidence for that.
And you believe that those are enough to take care of all of the airports right now?
Yes.
Do you have evidence for that point?
Yes, I have evidence. Would you like me to read it now?
Just briefly paraphrase it, please.
Okay. Here's one that says the TSA approved number of companies as qualified vendors comes up to 34 private security companies. Also, you take into account the international companies.
Okay, I think that's a good point. Yeah. Now, real quick question: do you think airports would be opposed to this program?
No.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
After 9/11, it became clear to many of us that aviation security was inseparable from national security, and we could not and should not rely on the private sector to do the job. This was said by Joe Lieberman, a senator from Connecticut, and it embodies what the negative team believes. We cannot allow the private sector to be in charge of airports, and rather we should keep it within the TSA. Allowing airport private screeners would create 3 major disadvantages. Before we see the flaws of the affirmative team's plan, as we see the flaws of the affirmative team's plan, you will see that there's no reason to change in the current system, and that any changes that the affirmative teams bring about would only create major disadvantages. Let's begin with the goal. Now, the affirmative team claimed that they have to make one better without harming the other. We will agree with this, and we will show you how the affirmative team is harming security at the price for better efficiency. And you'll see that this is not a good thing. So now that we've looked at the goal, let's move on to the plan. Our argument under the plan is that because it's open to competitive bidding, it will go to the lowest bidder. Now the lowest cost usually equals the lowest efficiency. You get what you pay for. The affirmative team claimed in their last speech that the airports will be able to choose. And yes, we agree. The airports will choose the lowest bidder because it costs the least money. This means that they'll choose the lowest bidder, and it will also be the lowest efficiency. This will be a bad thing, as we will say later on under the disadvantages. So now that we've addressed the plan, we can look at what the negative team believes is truly important. And the negative believes that security is important and we need to protect the Americans. This is the main idea of the negative team. According to P.J. Crowley, February 2008, in the article Safe at Home, a national security strategy to protect the American homeland, the real central front, the Center for American Progress. The paramount responsibility for homeland security belongs to the federal government. It simply cannot be outsourced to state and local governments or the private sector. Security is an important issue, and it cannot be given to the private sector. This would create major disadvantages, and it should not be done. Rather, the security should stay with the TSA. Now, let's look at the affirmative team's advantages. The main problem with their advantages is that under the current system, there is simply no significant reason to change. Under their first advantage of security, our argument is that under the current system, the SPP program is already working. The affirmative team has claimed that the TSA is blocking the SPP and it doesn't want it to continue. However, the affirmative team's evidence was slightly outdated and not up to date with the current system. According to U.S. Airport Security by Robert Poole, the Reason Foundation, April 1st, 2013. But in January 2011, the new TSA administrator rejected all pending applications for screening partnership program and announced that no more airports could participate. In response, the Senate adopted an amendment to its pending FAA reauthorization bill to require the TSA to accept applications and process them expeditiously, giving Congress the reason for any rejections. When the FAA bill was finally enacted in February 2012, it included these provisions, and the TSA announced it would resume accepting applications. By fall 2012, TSA had approved preliminary applications for a number of airports in Montana and California. So we can see from this evidence that although the TSA was originally opposed to the program, it is no longer opposed to it because Congress ordered it to continue and to give any reason for rejection. Thus, this SPP is working in the current system, and it's working to balance the TSA and privatization, which is what is good under the current system. So now that we've examined the first advantage, we can move on to the second advantage. The affirmative team asked for any evidence we had that stated that the TSA was effective in stopping terrorists. Well, we have evidence that says TSA has effectively stopped terrorists. From guests, Don't Privatize Airport Security, Everett Kelly, The Herald Tribune, September 2013. Federal screeners have not only proven their effectiveness in securing our safety, but have also been 100% successful in preventing terrorist attacks on passenger airlines in the United States. The TSA has been effective in preventing terrorist attacks. In addition, they are trying to make the system more efficient by implementing the program PreCheck. PreCheck allows certain certified people to go through quicker, and so this maximizes the efficiency and limits the wasted time. According to Robert Poole, April 1st, 2013, Airport Security, the Reason Foundation. Launched in 2011, the program is named PreCheck and proved to be highly attractive to frequent flyers. During 2012, TSA has continued to expand PreCheck, reaching its initial goal of having it in place for at least some 35 airlines at 35 airports by the end of 2012. So we can see that the TSA is already working to become more efficient. Now, I would like to point out that although it's only at 35 airports, it is because it is a relatively new program, and PreCheck will continue to expand and move to other programs and make the TSA more efficient. So now that we've seen that the affirmative team's advantages don't really have any reason for change, we can now move on to the disadvantages. The affirmative team's plan would create major disadvantages. The first one is of decreased national security. According to How to Make the TSA and Airports Work Better by P.J. Crowley and Lindsay Ross, the Center for American Progress, April 2nd, 2009. And if history is a guide, the passenger aviation system remains the most accessible way for a would-be terrorist to attack the United States and its economy. The airline system is still very vulnerable to terrorist attacks and needs to be protected. However, of the affirmative team's plan, they would be limiting to security. According to P.J. Crowley, February 2008, in the previously cited article, Safe at Home, nor can the private sector be automatically expected to take up the slack. Private security guards are poorly trained and paid, yet are expected to identify threats, stop attackers, and lead employees out of harm's way in the event of an incident. So we can see that poorly trained private security guards are poorly trained, and so this would lead to a disadvantage of decreased national security, which would greatly harm the aviation system. Now, the second disadvantage is that there would be low cooperation between the airports and the private screeners. The reason for this is that the airports don't actually want privatization. According to Ron Nixon, March 2012, the New York Times, officials at some of the nation's busiest airports, including the New York and Washington areas, said they had no desire to change. The airports don't want change. Thus, this will be a low cooperation between the airports and the private security. The third disadvantage is of job loss. TSA people will be losing their jobs, and this will cause great problems. Thank you, and I now stand open for cross-examination and further clarification.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Now, you read a piece of evidence, I believe, from the Herald Tribune by Everett Kelly. Who is Everett Kelly?
Excuse me, I have to find the piece of evidence first. He's a member of the American Federation of Government Employees.
Okay. Now, you mentioned under our goals that we would be sacrificing security while gaining efficiency. Did you concede efficiency to us?
No, well, attempting to gain efficiency.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. You also mentioned a piece of evidence under your first disadvantage about private security guards being poorly trained.
Yes.
Was that referring to airport screening people or just private security guards in general?
I'm not exactly sure. The evidence did not specifically say airports, but I'm sure I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Now, when you go through airport security, are they trying to stop bombs from going through or people from going through?
Bombs.
Okay. Did you know that the 9/11 terrorists only had plastic knives and box openers?
I did not know that, but I'm not sure how that's relevant.
Okay, so did private screening have a failure by letting a box opener through security?
Yes.
Were they supposed to stop box openers?
I have no idea.
Okay, thank you. Now, in general, do you think a monopoly is a good thing?
In the private sector, no.
Okay, but do you agree with the TSA, the monopoly TSA has on airports?
It's not a private monopoly. It's a government agency. That's not the same thing.
Okay. Finally, job loss. You mentioned that we would be losing jobs, but aren't private security firms going to have to create jobs as they cover all these new airports?
Yes, but I believe the problem is that the number of in some way you are going to be causing job loss, and though private security companies may be hiring more, those TSA people will still be losing their jobs. My partner can talk more about this in his next speech.
Okay, thank you. That would be very helpful. Looks like I'm out of time. Thank you.
The affirmative team is trying to tell us that what has worked in the past, what has worked for the last decade to stop any terrorist attacks when we fly on airplanes, hasn't worked, and that it could be improved upon. However, we can see that the current system is working to be innovation. To be innovative. The Transportation Security Administration is working on a pretty sensitive subject. Whatever they do is going to have repercussions throughout the entire country. So when they make changes, it might be a little bit slow. But the important thing here is that the government is working on making effective changes to mix the balance between private screeners in the most effective way they can be and government screeners who have been proven to be effective through past history. This round has gone down to the stock issues of inherency and solvency, which we'll be looking at in regards to the affirmative team's case, and whether or not they will actually meet the goals that they've presented of the status quo, the weighing mechanism for this round. Now, first we want to look under the inherency point. That pretty much falls under the two advantages. The first advantage is whether or not the SPP program is successful, or if that is a beneficial program. The affirmative team states that it hasn't been working well and that the TSA is opposed to this. Now, of course, the TSA is a government system and can be a little bureaucratical and not wanting any threat to their job to be put into existence. However, as my partner and I have stated, other forms of the government are working to make sure that this comes into play and actually can benefit the American people. The TSA has been bureaucratic itself. However, that is not stopping the rest of the government from taking things into their own hand for the betterment of the American people and their security. The Center for American Progress on April 2nd, 2009 said that after a relatively rocky start, the Transportation Security Administration has measurably improved aviation security. Its workforce is increasingly professional and stable. Lengthy security lines are now the exception rather than the rule, and if history is a guide, the passenger aviation system remains the most accessible way for would-be terrorists to attack the United States and its economy. In its own way, the Transportation Security Administration is working on improving the system. It's working on making its system the best it can. Whereas, on the other hand, the rest of the government is making sure that the benefits of private screeners are utilized by the TSA in the best way possible. They're looking for a mix. We don't want one of either thing, because there may be disadvantages to the TSA. They may be disadvantages to complete privatization, which is why the government is working towards this perfect balance. Next issue was that under Advantage 2, as this evidence I just read said that lengthy security lines are now the exception rather than the rule. Though, as my partner and I have mentioned, there are several programs that have made screening more efficient. The Council on Foreign Relations, September 7th, 2006, looks at some of the predecessors to the current system of PreCheck. It says that they allow frequent flyers to volunteer background information and biometric identifiers, such as fingerprints, in order to facilitate their security screening. Obviously, if you aren't a suspected terrorist and can prove yourself so, you can go through the system better, more quickly. However, if someone is a suspected terrorist, we don't want someone doing a quick job on them. Of course, for the betterment of the complete American people, we need a balance here. We don't want one quick system or one slow system. It's something that looks at both needs and makes sure that it can be do effectively. It wants to balance the precautions that we take with some efficiency, which is exactly what the current system is currently doing. Now next we have the issue of solvency. As we've just mentioned under inherency, there isn't really any reason to change, and the advantages won't be solving for anything in any significant way that is improved from the current system. But the most important thing under here is the three disadvantages that we've presented. The first one is that of decreased national security. As this potential exists of decreased national security. There's a potential for abuse. As the affirmative team has said, there will be competitive bidding, but when we take an inherently government function and move it over to private hands, to the private sector, there is a potential for a mistake. The TSA has done a good job so far in making sure that the system is effective in stopping terrorist attacks. The American Enterprise Institute on November 23, 2010 says the men and women of the TSA play a necessary role in stopping terrorists from succeeding. Now, even if there is something of a problem under the Transportation Security Administration and the way that they are doing security, shifting the security to the other private sector won't actually solve anything. The affirmative team has cited the Cato Institute, and the Cato Institute itself on January 10th, 2014 said shifting security to private operators would not eliminate problems. So here we're going to have decreased national security from a competitive marketplace. The second disadvantage is that we would have airport screeners wouldn't cooperate. Obviously, they don't want this change, and they're not going to be in favor of it. The last disadvantage is that, as the affirmative speaker in cross-examination said, there already are enough private companies to take over this job. TSA screeners are going to be outsourced and not lose their own jobs. Thank you, and I urge for a negative ballot.
Why assume government workers are what we need to make us safe? Do you think security would have been better on September 11th if government screeners had been on the job? If you think government employees do things better, visit your local Department of Motor Vehicles. Said investigative journalist John Stossel from his book, Give Me a Break. Now, this is the stance of the affirmative team that the TSA is currently inefficient and, in many ways, money, time, and security, or it lacks security, and needs to have the affirmative team's plan be adopted. So first, let me remind you of the goals and criteria of the affirmative team's case, which is that of strengthen aviation security and ensure maximum efficiency. And our criteria is that when we show either that we will improve security or efficiency, that's when you know you should vote for the affirmative team. So let's just go right into the remaining stock issues of this round, which are the inherency and solvency points. And under inherency, we have the point of the SPP program, which, the SPP program, I'd like to just remind you of the dates of evidence. The date of the evidence that the negative team brought up was from April 2013, and the affirmative team's evidence where we were citing that the TSA still doesn't want to adapt more airports to the SPP program is from November of 2013. So our evidence is more recent than the negative team's evidence as far as this SPP program point goes. So the TSA is still rejecting these applications unnecessarily, and that is why we need the affirmative team's plan. So, and also, only as far as the TSA working towards bettering themselves, only 16 airports have joined the SPP program at this point. So with the affirmative team's plan, we will privatize all commercial service airports, and that will increase the security and increase efficiency of airport screeners. Now for TSA pre-check, still under inherency, the argument here, let's see, is only 35 airports have used the pre-check program since 2012, and according to the negative teams, because of it's because of it being a new program. Now, note that since 2012, it's been 2 years. It's already 2014, and we don't know if there's more TSA pre-checks parts to airports or not. And also, you know, when a question of the negative team would be, when can we expect to see more of these airports get TSA pre-check? So also, now if we move on to solvency, where the meat is, disadvantage 1, 2, and 3 are under this point, along with the advantages. Our first advantage was to increase security, and advantage 2 was to increase the efficiency in terms of time and money of the system. Under disadvantage 1, that is a decrease of national security, but I'd like to read a piece of evidence from Privatizing the Transportation Security Administration, Chris Edwards, the Cato Institute, November 2013. Aviation security firms have developed a great deal of expertise over the decades. They have responded to the demands of their clients, and they apply the best practices they have learned across the airports they serve. Private businesses make mistakes, but unlike government bureaucracies, they are more likely to improve their performance over time, particularly in a competitive, contracting environment. Now, this point goes to show that the private system will make changes, better changes, faster and quicker. So with that, we can now look at the second disadvantage, which is that of the private sector employees are poorly paid, and the negative team read evidence from a newspaper, the Herald Tribune, from Everett Kelly, who was a member of the American Federation of Government Employees. I'd like to point out a bias here that somebody from the American Federation of Government Employees would naturally like their government job and therefore want to keep that system. So there's a bias there. And as for disadvantage 3, we have that of job loss. Again, there's no numbers from the negative team on any job loss here, and there's no reason to assume there would be job loss because private screeners and companies would need to hire employees as well. Under Advantage 2, I want to read a piece of evidence here from delayed U.S. aviation infrastructure policy at crossroads, previously cited. Forecasts by the FAA indicate that landslide and airborne delays and their association costs will become significantly worse unless the nation's aviation infrastructure improves the efficiency for which it helps passengers get to their destinations. Now, this is exactly what the affirmative team's plan is doing. We are increasing efficiency as far as security goes, and time and money. So for all of those reasons, I firmly urge for an affirmative ballot.
The affirmative team's goals are to strengthen the aviation security and maximize efficiency. However, the affirmative team will not be doing either, because we already have efficiency under the current system and because of the major disadvantages that the affirmative team's plan will bring about. Let's begin with the stock issue of inherency. The first issue under the stock issue of inherency falls under the first advantage, and it talks about the SPP program. The affirmative team in their last speech said that the TSA doesn't want SPP and that their evidence was more recent. However, I would like to point out that the affirmative team's evidence didn't really say why. It just said the TSA doesn't like SPP. It gave no reasons. However, our evidence, which we read in previous speeches, says that the FAA reauthorization bill signed by the President early last month, Congress underscored the importance of SPP being available to all airports. To reinforce the point that TSA, it now requires the agency to provide details on any opt-out application that it denies, explaining the reasons for such denial to the airport in question and to the relevant congressional committees. This is from Airport and Security Newsletter 77 by Robert Poole, the Reason Foundation, March 7th, 2012. What this piece of evidence is saying is that the TSA, even if it doesn't like it, it has to give a reason if it's going to reject the application. This means that there has to be a reason for the NSA to reject the application. So even if the even if the TSA doesn't like it, it still has to give a sufficient reason for rejecting the application. And if it's not a sufficient reason, then the privatization must continue. So we can see that under the current system, there is already an inherent program in place that is balancing privatization with the TSA. So now that we've addressed the SPP part, let's move on to the second point under inherency, which is that of efficiency. The first point is that the current system has already stopped terrorist attacks. We read a piece of evidence by Everett Kelly, the Herald Tribune, that federal screeners have not only proven their effectiveness in securing our safety, but have also been 100% successful in preventing terrorist attacks. So this is the same piece of evidence I read before, saying that they're already preventing terrorist attacks and they are efficient. Now, about pre-check, we have read evidence saying that pre-check is in place. Now, the reason it's only in 35 airports is because it's new. The affirmative team asks, when is it going to be implemented? Well, it's going to be implemented in more airports when it's found to be efficient yet safe, when it's found that it's successful. See, it's still checking it. But once it's done making sure that it's efficient, it will be implemented in many airports. So now that we've addressed the issue of inherency, we can move on to the stock issue of solvency. And this is where the disadvantages fall. Now, the first disadvantage that the negative team has presented is that of decreased national security. The affirmative team claimed that private companies are more likely to improve and to stop problems. However, the private companies would not really solve any problems. As my partner read in his last speech, shifting security to private operators would not eliminate problems. This comes from Privatize the TSA, Make Americans by Doug Bandeau, January 10th, the Cato Institute. This is even someone who supports it, saying that it would not actually eliminate the problems. So it wouldn't actually eliminate problems, and it would cause decreased national security. According to Ron Nixon, March 15, 2012, the New York Times, airlines or airports used to have private security companies to screen passengers. But questions were raised in 2001 after the attacks of September 11th, and federal inquiries found that many private companies had hired untrained security guards. Private companies do not always hire the best security guards to make sure that there's most efficient security. Thus, we're going to have a decreased national security because private security is less efficient. Now, I would like to clarify what our second disadvantage really is. It's not that this private security guards are poorly trained. It's that there's going to be a low cooperation between the airports and the private security because the airports simply don't want it. Now, the affirmative team claimed that our piece of evidence was biased. However, I believe the affirmative team is a little confused. They're confused in the tag of our disadvantage. They're also confused that Everett Kelly evidence was not under the second disadvantage. Under the second disadvantage, we had an article from Ron Nixon, and it stated that the nation's busiest airports, they don't want this. Now, moving on to the third disadvantage of job loss. The affirmative team admitted themselves that there are already private companies who already have workers and are open to doing the private security. This means that the TSA agents would lose their jobs. Thank you, and I urge for a negative ballot.
After all the speeches in the round, I've finally come to a realization. I figured out who doesn't want 55% less bombs. The negative team. Okay. So, I'm going to go right through, beginning with our goals. Our goals were conceded to, the negative team conceded the goals to us, so we'll be seeing if we can meet number 1, strengthening airport security, or number 2, ensuring maximum efficiency. In order to clarify the round on this criteria or weighing point, I'm going to organize this speech into 2 voting issues, organizing all the points under them. Number 1, security, or increasing security, and number 2, efficiency. So beginning with the point under security. I'd like to remind you of all the evidence we read beginning in the 1AC. First of all, that Canada has done it and has seen great improvements. Second of all, the SPP airports in the United States have done privatization. We have seen great results through competition and other means. In fact, we read evidence that they catch 80% of bombs instead of 20% of bombs. So this is a huge issue huge voting issue that private security catches more bombs and thus improves our security and saves American lives. I'd also like to remind you that the status quo is not doing its job. First of all, they're letting 75% of bombs through, and also they failed to catch the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, and a bunch of other bombs that I read a piece of evidence previously. Now let's look at the negative arguments against this. First was the SPP program. They asked for clarification on why the TSA doesn't want it, according to the article from November 19th, 2013 from the Cato Institute. The expansion of private screening is a threat to TSA bureaucracy, so it's not surprising that the TSA has a history of intimidating airport operators that express an interest in participating in the program. Once again, this evidence is more recent, and TSA doesn't want to accept more SPP. Let's look at the facts. There's only 16 airports out of the 475 who are even in the SPP program now. It's not likely that this is going to make any significant change. Next, I'll look at their disadvantage 1, was that we would have less airport security. Their point under this was that the Cato Institute said that privatizing wouldn't solve all problems. Well, it's not going to solve all problems, but one thing it is going to do, it's going to increase security and increase efficiency. Once again, I'd like to remind you of all the evidence that we have read saying how much it is going to increase our security. Secondly, under this point is disadvantage 2, that airports don't really want to privatize. Thank you. I would like to thank them for clarifying that point. But actually, screeners do want to privatize. From Gatekeepers Under Scrutiny, Susan Stellan, the New York Times, 2012. I think just every airport director in the country would agree with me. We would rather be in charge of security, said TJ Orr, Director of Aviation Security for Charlotte Douglas International Airport. So they do want airport security, and cooperation isn't really going to be a major problem. They haven't shown why it's going to have any serious effect on security. So let's go into the second voting issue of efficiency. I'd like to remind you of the evidence we read in our very first affirmative speech that said that, from the Reason Foundation, saying that private security would cause the average wait time to go from about 20 minutes down to 10 minutes. Now, that's your time being saved. Not only that, also it saves money. The negative team went uncontested that our program is going to save $3 billion. $3 billion is a huge, significant benefit. This is your taxpayer money that's now going to boost the economy and create significant benefits in our nation instead of being wasted on airport security that doesn't work. Their point under this was pre-check. Now, some things under pre-check. First of all, it hasn't been implemented yet. It's only been implemented at 35 airports out of the 400. And number two, it's only for specific people. If you want to give them your fingerprint, other biometrics, and $85, then you can get into pre-check, but they never even mentioned how much more efficient pre-check is or what it even does. The quantifiable facts of efficiency is that private security does it better, and that's our second voting issue. Now, finally, their disadvantage 3 of job loss. This doesn't really have a bearing on either efficiency or security, so it doesn't matter towards our goals. And also, they brought up no numbers on any actual job loss. So for the stock issues of inherency and solvency, I urge for an affirmative ballot. Thank you.